Good day, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Joining us today is organized by the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation at the Virtual Aid for Trade Stocktaking event organized by the WTO, being held from the 23rd to the 25th of March on the role of South-South Cooperation in digital technology, in structuring a globally inclusive post-COVID-19 economic architecture for increased trade facilitation. Technical support towards this webinar has been provided by the China Association of Trading and Services. My name is Hani Basada, a Senior Research and Program Advisor at the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation and your moderator for today's webinar. To kickstart this exciting event, I would like to welcome Dr. Adel Abdel Latif, Director AD Interim of the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation, to deliver his opening remarks. Adel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hani. And first of all, I'm very happy to see all the participants. You know, it is maybe one day we will get to have this physical, contact, which actually we are trying to do it virtually, which is very much the focus of our discussion today about digitalization. But let me first express my pleasure as the Director ad interim of the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation to deliver the opening remarks at this session, which is organized by our office. And also would like to thank WTO for inviting our office to organize this session, which will be focusing on the role of South-South cooperation and digital technology in structuring a globally inclusive post-COVID-19 economic architecture for increased trade facilitation. In the new normal context constrained by COVID-19, with reduced travel and movement, digitalization is more important than during any prior pandemic era to trade and transactions. COVID-19 has strongly highlighted the lack of institutional and ICT capacity in many developing countries. The global economy has been transformed by digital technologies on a massive scale. Digitalization provides great prospects for institutional change and inclusive growth. Particularly, it unleashes developmental capacities critical to growth of cross-border trade and e-commerce, as well as international convergence across all business platforms. Against this background, we must also recognize that new areas of cooperation among southern economies during the pandemic have underlined how South and triangular cooperation are essential tools of response and sustainable socio-economic recovery. Digitalization can provide opportunities for disadvantaged communities in society to be able to be more accessible and included in processes that affect them. Yet, in the Global South, there is an emerging digital knowledge void in development cooperation that needs to be addressed. This divide will continue to feed on the vulnerabilities of emerging economies and have regressive consequences for future generations unless cooperative efforts are made. COVID-19 has come as a shock to society, health services, markets, and policymakers around the world, despite the fact that a global pandemic has been a looming threat for decades. Current global economic circumstances have created an incentive to deepen South-South cooperation by focusing on collaboration rather than competition. Exchanges between policymakers and health practitioners in the Global South have been critical in establishing an informative forum to advise countries on control and prevention policies during the pandemic. Mobilizing the necessary domestic and international resources to combat and move past this pandemic, equitably accessible digital technology for the increased facilitation of trade is critical. Through enabling mobile-based and information and communications technology, ICT-based services transfers using blockchain platforms for funding and regulatory purposes, and opening new domestic value-adding networks for firms in regional and global value chains, digitalization will help unlock the capacity of firms across the South. Many economies in the global South have, however, a long way to go in terms of investing in digital technologies for the leveraging of the digital connectivity. Southern economies may further leverage digitalization to improve trade and business facilitation, increase trade and company competitiveness, and use the digital technology to boost company, enterprise, sectoral, and macro level efficiency, while also making policy execution easier. Increasing digital skills and infrastructure are important factors in developing a resilient recovery and opening doors to further digital development. Intergovernmental coordination and cooperation has also proved efficient in providing the political atmosphere for the increased facilitation of digital trade platforms without overlooking the elements that could nudge the global economy back to pre-pandemic trade protectionism. We must embrace this opportunity to build back better. This will require prioritizing long-term resilience. South-South cooperation networks are critical in laying the groundwork for a long-term inclusive economic recovery. Despite the tremendous human, social, physical costs associated with this crisis, it has provided a once-in-a-lifetime catalyst for global transformation. In reaction to COVID-19, the South may need to deepen strategic relationships that are at the center of the South-South trade cooperation and rally around multilateral reforms that promote more inclusive digital global governance. With these considerations in mind, our office organized this session to encourage discussion on the following thematic areas: South-South cooperation and digitalization in trade and investment, South-South cooperation modalities and instruments for accelerating regional trade integration, and challenges and prospects in the context of sustainable recovery. As you may be aware, the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation is a knowledge hub, knowledge sharing and providing advisory and consulting services to all stakeholders on South-South and triangular cooperation is one core mandate of the office. Today, this session will also launch several publications of the South-South Global Think Tanks Network. I would like also to take this opportunity to encourage you to use the platforms that were launched by the office for knowledge sharing and partnership brokering, particularly the South-South Galaxy and South-South Global Think Tanks. Finally, I would like to wish to this panel all, that we will enrich the discussion. I'm looking forward also to hear from the researchers, the eminent researchers and contributors, and I see two of them are from my own country, so I'm very glad to see that, and particularly that we have also good gender balance in the discussion. Thank you. Over to you, Hani.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adel, for this excellent introductory remarks, which beautifully sets the stage for today's discussions. I've had the distinguished pleasure of welcoming our esteemed panelists who have graciously agreed to participate in today's webinar. As part of today's event, as Dr. Adel mentioned in his remarks, we're very pleased to launch 4 UN Office for South-South Cooperation publications written by our distinguished speakers. The South-South Idea Paper series presents a comprehensive framework which promotes Southern scholarship, a distinct and substantive concept of Southern academics. The series presents an opportunity to disseminate an extensive and cross-disciplinary breadth of knowledge on the topic of South-South cooperation from which to draw upon. In recognizing the economic contribution of Southern economies to the global economy and the ways in which these contributions can utilize existing and new South-South cooperation platforms to promote regional integration, the series further sets the stage for broad-range analysis of South-South cooperation. We believe that all of the 4 South-South cooperation papers produced under the Global Thinkers Initiative presented today would add great value in terms of knowledge generation to the theme and discussions of today's webinar. To start with, I'm very pleased to welcome Ms. Benoiswari Bulaki. Ms. Bulaki is an Economic Affairs Officer with the UN Economic Commission for Africa, Sub-Regional Office for Southern Africa based in Lusaka. Prior to that, she served in the Africa section and the Least Developed Countries section of the Division for Africa at UNCTAD in Geneva. She has been an author for UNCTAD LDC report and Economic Development in Africa report. Ms. Bolaki, over to you. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Hani. First of all, I would like to extend my gratitude and warm regards to the UN Office for South-South Cooperation, Director Abdelatif, and to you, Hani, for inviting my institution, UN Economic Commission for Africa, as a part of this event. I am an economist based in Lusaka here, and I am originally from Mauritius. So I think I will share my screen, hoping that everything works well when it comes to the technological side. Okay, is this visible, please?
Yes.
It is. Okay, I'm going to turn off my video to save on bandwidth, because here in Lusaka it's 6 o'clock in the evening, so to avoid any internet issues. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased today to present this paper that I wrote and has been published with under the South-South Ideas series. The title of the paper is South-South Cooperation Finance for Mobilization of the Private Sector to Achieve Sustainable Development Goals. Okay, now how do I move to the next? Okay, here we go. First, I would like, since I have only 10 minutes, I will try to be as quick as I can. First, the outline of a paper. In the first part of the paper, we lay out what are some of the challenges and emerging issues in a post-COVID-19 context in terms of financing the Sustainable Development Goals. The paper argues that the battleground for achieving the SDGs lies in rural Africa and rural South Asia, that COVID-19 has made the achievement of the SDGs backed by multilateral cooperation more imperative than ever. And the paper argues for South-South development cooperation to be leveraged to stimulate local private sector development and finance, especially given that the SDG financing gap is huge and is likely to increase under COVID. Then the second part of the paper, the chapter 2, look at the main trends in South-led financing mechanisms in relation to the SDGs. It looks at how South-South development finance can be used to stimulate local private sector development. And then in chapter 3, it articulates a case for developing countries to move away from a northern-led financial architecture by highlighting some of the limitations of ODA and the concerns that developing countries continue to have over ODA. And then in chapter 4, which is the critical part of the paper, the paper outlines what should be the characteristics of a new South-South development cooperation financial architecture, and offers some conclusions. So since time is short, since time is short, I am going to convey some of the main messages as captured by the executive summary of the paper. So the starting point is really with COVID, and as the world battles the onslaught of COVID in 2020-2021, it seems that achieving the SDGs by 2030 have been placed on a back burner. But this is a bit ironic because, if anything, COVID-19 has exposed the unabated vulnerabilities of developing countries to unexpected shocks to sustainable development, whose effects are exacerbated by precisely a lack of progress in achieving the SDGs. So what I'm saying here is that by not achieving the SDGs in a timely manner, developing countries remain at increased exposure to the adverse effects of unexpected economic, environment, and social shocks. That is, the cost of adverse unexpected development shocks increase in the face of a lack of progress on SDGs in developing countries. Furthermore, COVID-19 as a pandemic that knows no borders has evidenced the imperative for cross-border, regional, and multilateral, including South-South cooperation in addressing specific types of shocks. So the paper argues that achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals remains a development priority in the Global South, where most of the scope for reducing poverty and inequality and creating decent jobs lie. We have seen that SDGs have been mainstream in national development strategies of many developing countries from the Global South. However, for the goals to be realized, massive investment in a range of sectors is required over a prolonged period of time. And according to some estimates, the average Sdg financing gap per year for the 59 low-income developing countries, the LIDCs, is in the order of $400 billion between 2019 and 2030. According to a 2014 report from UNCTAD, investing in the SDGs will necessitate incremental spending of about $2.5 trillion annually in the Global South. But of course, all these estimates now have to be revisited upwards because of the pandemic. So the critical question is, how can the Agenda 2030, such an ambitious agenda, be financed with only 10 years to go, and even more so in a post-COVID-19 context, where fiscal revenues are being diverted towards addressing the impact of a crisis, and many development gains are being reversed. So financing the SDGs in a world fighting COVID has indeed become a serious challenge, and especially given that the traditional sources of development finance have come under strain, a trend that started before the advent of COVID-19, but which is likely to be aggravated by the latter. And as you can see on the chart, there has been a decline in traditional ODA in developing countries since 2016, whereas many of the biases that are inherent in ODA allocation continue to exist, that result in aid being disbursed based sometimes on geopolitical strategic factors that are often divorced from economic needs. And also there are concerns increasing about the rising involvement of Northern-led DFIs, development finance institutions, and the international private sector in the aid-driven development cooperation. So the paper looks at how South-South development finance can be better harnessed to address the challenges of financing the SDGs in a post-COVID context. And as we may recall, South-South development finance can be a mixture of grants, interest-free loans, and concessional finance, though the degree of concessionality may differ from country to country. So to help countries achieve the SDGs, the paper argues that we need to put the spotlight back again on SDG 17, which is to strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development. SDG 17 contains 19 targets to mobilize resources and form partnerships. And in building back better in a post-COVID-19 world, it has become timely and necessary for the international development community, including the Global South, to put these 19 targets back on the table as part of a renewed global development compact within the new global deal. As you may recall, in July 2020, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called on the global development community to establish a new social contract and a new global deal, inviting countries, governments, business communities, citizens, and civil society to rally around common causes. So what the paper says is that among the SDG 17 targets, there are 2 targets that is specifically focused on mobilization of multi-stakeholder partnerships at international and national levels for financial resources, namely SDG 17, 17.16 and 17.17. And these targets, when we look at it together, call for a further mobilization of South-South partnerships and enhancing the role of the private sector in these partnerships. But leveraging South-South development finance and involving the local private sector to achieve the SDGs at a national level in many developing countries remains to be more fully harnessed. In the paper, we did a review of the provisions of the latest voluntary national reviews, VNRs, of 44 African countries that have elaborated a VNR, and that review revealed that 24 out of 44 other countries made no explicit reference to South-South Development Cooperation other than to report progress on SDG indicator 17.3.1. So when South-South Development Cooperation is mentioned, in many cases, either it is viewed as a means to facilitate technology and skills transfer, rather than as a significant source of additional innovative finance that can complement traditional finance, or sometimes in the reviews, the South-South Development Cooperation is just mentioned to pay lip service to the cause. But very often, there are no specific examples of mechanisms and instruments that are mentioned in these VNRs where that could be deployed in the future to leverage South-South finance towards achievement of the SDGs. So that review of VNRs revealed that at least for the African region, specific mechanism and instruments for utilizing South-South development cooperation to finance the SDGs, aside from its role in technology transfer and capacity building, remain to be developed. So what the paper argues that there should be greater country level reporting on the amount and composition of South-South development finance in voluntary national reviews and also in development finance assessments that are carried out within integrated national financing framework activities. In addition, the paper calls for debt sustainability arising from South-South development cooperation to be given greater attention because it merits as much attention as when the debt originates from the North, whether it comes from the North or the South. There is a need for more transparent reporting and disclosure of the amounts borrowed and how the debt is being utilized, whether it is being utilized for government consumption or productive investment, with windfall gains on the local private sector. And in addition, the role of a local private sector within such arrangements must be made more explicit. So this brings up another set of critical questions. How can South-South development finance benefit local private sector development in recipient countries? And to what extent can South-South finance be harnessed to promote local private sector engagement and contributions to finance and achieve the SDGs? So the paper argues that South-South development cooperation must increasingly contribute to the development of a local private sector. Why? Because by strengthening the capabilities and profitability of a local private sector and their taxable bases, South-South development cooperation can strengthen domestic resource mobilization in recipient countries. And this form of cooperation, that is South-South development finance cooperation, should increasingly be used as a catalyst for promoting local private sector development and as a means for building the capacities of local business ecosystems. But how? So the paper makes several proposals. For instance, the paper argues that when countries sign onto South-South development cooperation deals, countries must be vigilant that such deals do not carry adverse consequences for their local private sector, for example, by promoting anti-competitive practices. Through South-South development cooperation finance packages, joint ventures must be encouraged between sovereign-led firms and the local private sector. So that the recipient countries can reap tangible benefits in terms of boosting national entrepreneurship and promoting the participation in global value chains. In addition, the paper argues that South-South cooperation development finance should go beyond exchanges between the governments of nation states and instead promote more private-to-private business interactions. It should not remain centered on large-scale infrastructure projects. It should instead promote sectoral diversification and especially industrial and rural development. It should also embrace innovative finance modalities and trilateral development cooperation. As you may recall, trilateral development cooperation is a partnership between OECD DAC donors and all multilateral agencies and emerging countries to implement a development program in a third recipient country. Also, the paper argues for the creation of pooled national funds to finance SDGs at a national level, where government, the local private sector, sovereign development partners, traditional donors, IFIs and DFIs can all contribute in order to facilitate the bridging of coordination gaps on SDG delivery in developing countries and avoid uncoordinated, fragmented, and small-scale piecemeal approaches with little tangible impact. So in building back better in a post-COVID-19 world, this paper argues that it has become timely and necessary for the international development community, including the Global South, to establish a new global development compact within the new global deal. The compact should aim to prevent a major reversal of development gains in the Global South and avoid sidetracking of progress that has been made in achieving the SDGs. There's a need to identify new and innovative ways to finance development for the SDGs, including financing from the Global South and the involvement of the private sector. So the paper calls for a new South-South development finance architecture with several characteristics. For instance, South-South development cooperation finance.
Yes. You have 1 minute.
1 minute, okay, thanks. So I will just cover 3 points more. The paper argues for South-South corporate development finance to be increasingly disbursed in the form of untied grants rather than concessional loans, for it to aim at for it to be targeted at economic diversification and structural transformation, avoid concentration in large-scale infrastructure projects, and concentration in only a few economic sectors, such as commodities in the African context. More of it should support entrepreneurship, the development of large enterprises and MSMEs, and also the paper also calls for a proper monitoring, recording and monitoring of this finance according to an agreed set of common standards to ensure transparent, accountable, and efficient usage of the funds. It also calls for South-South development finance to be governed by a set of principles that rest on country ownership, transparency and accountability, stability and predictability, monitoring for results, that it should adhere to the additionality principle, and also that more of it should be used within multi-stakeholder partnerships rather than on its own, and within cooperative frameworks that are aimed at achieving the SDGs and national development objectives, such as the Integrated National Financing Framework. So this is it from me, Hani, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Polaki, for a very informative and rich presentation of your paper that evaluates South-South cooperation finance for mobilization of the private sector to achieve the SDGs. In your paper, you assess how the emerging financial mechanisms, including private sector-led initiatives, are designed to foster resource mobilization in the Global South. Your paper makes the case for a new emerging Southern-led financial architecture with active private sector participation, and sketches what should be the guiding principles underlining it and the modalities and instruments that can be deployed to mobilize resources within it. I'd like now to welcome Dr. George Carrich. Dr. Carrich is the lead economist for the African Development Bank, a visiting professor at Wits School of Governance at University of Wits in Johannesburg, South Africa, and a non-resident fellow at the Payne Institute, Colorado School of Mines. Until recently, as senior economist at the Economic Commission for Africa, Dr. Carrich has also taught economics at various universities across the world. Dr. Carrich, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes.
Thanks, Danny. So I'm not going to do the PowerPoint magic because I think they slow things down. So I'm gonna just speak about what I had prepared, and I think I should start with kind of a health warning, right? So you know, when we do this kind of work, and it's an important piece of work to be done, certainly, about knowledge generation. And being in the development practical space, there's always a danger of us going around countries and dishing off what we think we know without thinking about context. So knowledge is important, but that knowledge must be localized and must be married with reality of local context. So that's the caveat of my comments. And my comments will be organized around 3 issues. The first one is issues around concepts. And these concepts evolve all the time. And in fact, those are the things that drive our understanding, for example, of the theory of change. And that is an important element. And then I will talk broadly around the constraints on trade and investment in Africa, and what role South-South cooperation might actually play in that. And the article that I think is available on your website go into real detail on some of the proposed agenda for action. So when we talk about capacity, and I think the director mentioned it, my former colleague at the ECA also mentioned it. What is it that we are talking about when we are saying we're talking about capacity? Yeah. So when you talk capacity, you're talking about ability to deliver individual, organizational, state objectives and mandates. And unfortunately, in Africa, there's a general agreement that these capabilities actually have been constrained. And as a result, the continent has not taken advantage of trade and investment opportunities presented by the global economy. Having said that, I need to note that the continent certainly has made some strides in lifting some of the constraints, hindering its effort in achieving sustainable development and reducing abject poverty, right? The absolute numbers of the poor in Africa is still high, but in terms of relative to the population, it has come down. So absolute numbers, because of our population dynamics, the population growth is still high. But overall, as a proportion of the general population, the number of the poor actually come down. So there's some progress in that direction. And as I said, our governments, African governments, are increasingly aware of the importance of developing capacity to promote trade and attract investments, and also kind of engage with the global economy in ways that can reap benefits for globalization. So to this end, a range of policies have been and continue to be developed and implemented with a view of improving capacity of countries to expand trading and investment horizons. Now, we also have, I think, a general consensus among policymakers on the desirability and the necessity of accelerating integration in particular in Africa, and the need to draw lessons for the continent from the experiences of the global South. So there are lots and lots of books and articles on, you know, the miracle in Southeast Asia and what can be learned from there, the experience of agricultural transformation in countries like Brazil and so on. So there's that awareness that there's something that Africa can actually learn from the global South. So the fundamental issue, therefore, is how best to integrate in a way that is sustainable and contribute to the development of the continent. And in that regard, I think when we talk about South-South cooperation, it will be helpful then to understand what is it that we're talking about. And we need to explain to our stakeholders really exactly what we are talking about. And in my space, I'm using South-South cooperation to mean the exchange of resources, technology, knowledge between countries of the global South. Right? I see somebody is trying to put the presentation. Will that help? Or should I just continue? Right?
You can continue. We're just showing the cover of the.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So the point is that you listening to the first speaker and also listening to the remark of the director, it's clear that the notion of South-South cooperation and its nature actually has evolved over time. And I think from the days of the Bandung Spirit at the conference in Malaysia, the way back to now, I think the content and the activities that are being undertaken by countries and the kind of exchanges among countries in the global South have actually significantly changed, including the priorities that were actually being constructed. For those who are interested in history, many of these conversation at the beginning was put in a kind of a decolonization stance, but those objectives have actually changed since then. So what I'm saying is that the context in which we're talking about South-South cooperation now is totally different. We have different challenges, and COVID is one good example, right? So we are now dealing with a totally different context, and in that regard, our thinking and our knowledge. So the marriage between theory and practice also need to change in essence. Now, so let me talk very, very briefly on the constraints on trade and investment in Africa. Now, for those who might have followed the continent since the 1980s, African countries have actually sought to liberalize their economy. So there was a big push to promote trade and inward investments as core strategies of the development of many of the countries on the continent. Many of the countries signed, for example, economic partnership agreements as a way of promoting investment and trade activities on the continent. And as members, and many of them are, as members of the WTO, several African countries have ratified the agreement on trade and related investment measures. which to some extent also it prohibits government from requiring foreign investors to use locally produced inputs. Unfortunately, this, in my view, kind of has a negative underbelly in the sense that it kind of weakens the ability to develop local content and value addition. And it's something that actually, if you read the many reports produced, for example, by the ECA and the ADB, among others, there's a lot of argumentation for greater value addition in Africa. So we need to rethink that. So the reality, that's why I'm saying the reality and the knowledge need to be married in constructive ways. Now, let me give you quickly examples of some of the constraints that you will, if you read the paper, you will see, and then I will say what role would South-South cooperation play. The first one, which we always have at the front, is the fact that we don't have really very integrated trade and investment policies in line with the rest of the national development agenda in many countries. So integrated development policy where trade, investments, education, industrial policy all speak to the same set of objectives. I think that is to come by. And so that in itself actually undermines the capacity for countries to then effectively benefit from any trade or even open the conditions for investments at home. The other one that people talk about a lot is around issues of infrastructure. And the director actually did mention that, including digital infrastructure. Connectivity in Africa remains a problem. My good colleague from ECA also alluded to that. You have bandwidth issues, for example. So with COVID, everybody now is talking about e-commerce, but you can't do e-commerce without the digital platforms and the logistical capabilities to move goods across the continent. The other one is business and regulatory frameworks. Again, you know, we tend to get caught up in red tapes. You know, how long does it take you to actually set up a business, let's say in Ethiopia compared to in South Africa or compared to in Uganda? Now, the reason why these variations actually matter is primarily because now we are all talking about the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. To do that, I think that we need to make sure that there is harmonization in this regulatory environment. And if not, you know, those countries with more efficient institutions and more developed infrastructure will actually reap the benefits of the economies of scale. And the weaker regions will suffer. And so you will find that we may have to then think about special policies that can prop up those lagging areas. But do we have in place such a mechanism to be able to do that? For now, I don't think we have those capabilities. And most of the funding of many of the development initiatives in Africa actually are inward looking, either because countries borrow from the likes of the ADB, or they go to the World Bank, or they do bilateral arrangements. So regional perspectives to development initiatives are far in between. You may find it maybe on issues of transboundary water management, but it's not widespread.
Dr. Carrich, sorry, we have 1 minute.
Yeah, so I'm almost done. So what we need to do then is, what is it that we can get out of South-South cooperation? It's, as I said, South-South cooperation is essentially just exchange of knowledge, resources, and partnerships to actually deliver. And there's a wide range of areas where we can do that, not just in trade. We can take advantage clearly of global South trade. For example, between 2000 and 2016, trade quadrupled to close to 30.9 trillion. And we can take advantage of that. Africa, for example, needs to speed up the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. The other area where we can do a lot more work jointly and, you know, with full sovereignty is around issues of research and R&D and innovation. COVID has actually just presented that evidence that we need to do that. Otherwise, we are going to be stuck in the environment where you have, for example, vaccine nationalism. So that is the essence of my paper. There's a list of agenda for action. The essence is that South-South cooperation has great potential. We need to contextualize it in Africa, and if we do that, then we will be able to marry the knowledge and the context with beneficial effects for the continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Carrich, for a very important presentation where you interrogate the ongoing debate about the benefits of South-South cooperation, particularly with respect to trade for Africa. You argue that the lack of capacity defined as the ability to deliver individual, organizational, and state objectives and mandates has actually constrained Africa from taking advantage of trade investment opportunities presented by the global economy. Highlights the lack of capacity, but more importantly, the significant strides in lifting some of the constraints hindering its effort to achieving sustainable development and reducing abject poverty. Your presentation makes a valuable contribution to the discussion on the role of South-South cooperation can play in this effort to ramp up African trade and related investments. I'd like to now welcome Dr. Professor Miriam Ramsey. Professor Miriam is currently an assistant professor at the Department of Economics at Cairo University. In 2005, she graduated from the Faculty of Economics and Political Science with a major in economics. We also would like to welcome our collaborator, Professor Shahir Zaki. Professor Shahir is an associate professor of economics at Cairo University and a director of the French section of the faculty. He's also working for the Economic Research Forum in Cairo as a lead economist. Professor Miriam, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Haley, for inviting us to participate in this event. The paper I will present is titled is How Digitalization Matters for Trade Integration in Africa. It's co-authored with my colleague, Dr. Shahir Zaki. The outline is mainly divided into 4 points. First, I'll tackle why digitalization matters in general for trade integration. Then I will highlight some stylized facts related to digital trade in Africa. Then I'll present the challenges facing trade integration in Africa. And finally, the opportunities that will be raised by digitalization to enhance trade integration in Africa. As we all know that global, regional, and national economies have been always experiencing significant changes brought about by the increasing evolution of digital technologies. Also, the increased use of digital technologies have recently become more of a necessity and less of an option, especially after the uncontrolled outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, because these technologies present an essential solution to have contactless transactions between individuals, businesses, and governments. So starting with the first point, why digitalization matters for trade integration, mainly because digitalization is significantly shaping the structure of international trade. And I'll tackle this by focusing on the impact on trade flows composition, the impact on trade costs, and finally, the impact on production processes. Regarding the impact on the composition of trade flows, first, the digitalization leads to the emergence of new types of trade. And here we can talk about trade in parcels or the emergence of the cross-border e-commerce. Also, the increased trade in digital goods and services, and like ebooks, for example, and also trade in creative industries. And here we mean mainly goods and services that have cultural content and they are intangible in nature. Also, digitalization can have an important role in deepening the existing types of trade, like, for example, agriculture, in which Africa has a comparative advantage and it's a time-sensitive sector. So digitalization can increase or deepen trade in agriculture by reducing trade costs. Why? Because, for example, African farmers can greatly rely on digital platforms to access more reliable information on market conditions, the prices of the products, the existing diseases, or even they can keep track of the products along the supply chain. Also, digitalization is essential for increasing the tradability in services. And we know that the manufacturing sector is becoming increasingly relying on services in general. Regarding the impact on the cost level, the literature has shown that digitalization or e-commerce can reduce distance-related trade costs by 30%. Also, the automation of custom procedures can have a positive impact on custom efficiency by reducing the reliance on the bureaucratic and lengthy procedures, which accelerate the delivery of goods. Also, it can help reducing the red tape barriers costs and make the collection of taxes more efficient and transparent. And this will have also a positive impact on government revenues. Regarding the impact on production processes, using digital technologies can enhance firm productivity, leading to an expansion in output, exports, and it will have a positive impact on employment. Also, it will help firms to diversify the production of commodities by moving from the mere primary product into more sophisticated products with higher value added. And this is very related to the African exporters who can really rely on digital technologies to reduce their export commodity dependence, and therefore they will be able to better integrate into global value chains. Also, digitalization can reduce coordination and matching costs and in the highly decentralized global value chains, which will broaden the ability of clients to participate in global value chains. Moving to the second point, what is the scope of digital trade in Africa? Here I will tackle the status of e-commerce in Africa in general and what Africa digital trade. Regarding the status of e-commerce in Africa, the figure here shows that the total number of digital buyers is in Africa and Middle East is lagging behind the world global figures. Also, the two correlation plots here between the B2C e-commerce index and the online shopping at the global level in Africa shows that there is a big contrast because the relationship is less pronounced for the case of Africa. Why? This can be summarized in few reasons. Reasons. First, the low reliability of the postal services, and this is reflected in the low integrated postal development index in Africa in 2019 compared to Asia, Latin America, and Arab states. Also, Africa is suffering from the global digital divide reflected in the low ICT penetration rates compared to the Arab states and Asia. Also, the lack of confidence in online platforms due to the limited regulatory and enforcement capacity, which highly exposes consumers and businesses to cybercrimes and privacy abuse. Also, the limited awareness of consumers about the possibility of online shopping and online payments. For example, in South Africa, most people use the social network, digital platforms only to social network, not for online shopping. And also, Africa suffers from other digital devices, not only at the global level, but also at the regional level. For example, in East and North Africa, they have the highest ICT penetration rates compared to Sub-Saharan Africa. And also, there are several digital divides at the national level in between urban and rural areas and males and females in terms of using digital technology or having access to digital technologies. What Africa trade, here I will focus on 4 dimensions: trade in parcels, trade in digital services, the idea of bundling between trade in ICT goods and services, and finally the trade in creative industries. First, for the trade in parcels, the figure here shows that first that e-commerce in most regions is domestic in nature, because we have the number of totally exchanged domestic parcels higher than the total number of internationally exchanged parcels. Africa is lagging behind the Middle East, Latin America, and this may be explained by the high cost of trade in general when it concerns the small low-value parcels. Also, some complicated custom procedures, even though we can cite some African initiatives to promote cross-border e-commerce like Jumia, Kilimall in Kenya, and also the Universal Postal Union initiative Ecom at Africa to promote the cross-border e-commerce in Africa. Also, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement could have some opening to simplify trading regimes related to parcels with value less than $500. Moving to the second type of digital trade, in general, digital trade in digital services has increased in most regions and also at the world level. It presents more than 50% of total trade in services. Africa is still lagging behind, but it's moving towards increasing the share of digital services in total trade in services, because this could provide opportunities for Africa to better integrate in the world trade in services, especially that it's associated with its increased servicification of the economy. And also this will go in parallel with high innovations in areas related to banking, money transfers, also the move towards having digitally delivered the healthcare and insurance services. Regarding the third type of digital trade, the idea of bundling, which is a key strategy for boosting e-commerce in general, it's not really shown for the case of Africa because they tend to export more ICT services and to import more ICT goods. And this shows that the service task could present an important advantage for African integration into global value chain, especially that ICT services are easier to deliver remotely. The final type of digital trade is the trade in creative goods and services. And you can find from the figure here that trade in creative goods, the experts of creative goods are mainly consist mainly of the design and mainly jewelry, while the imports of creative goods are more diversified. They tend to import more audio shares related for the trade in creative services. For the experts and services, for the exports and imports, they are more diversified. They tend to export and import more of architectural, engineering, and other technical services. We have the personal, cultural, recreational services. Moving to the third point related to the challenges for trade integration in the digital era, we have some.
Sorry, Dr. Mariam, sorry, you have 2 minutes left.
Okay, I'll finish now. We have the inadequate digital infrastructure, the lack of ICT skills, the policy and regulatory issues, and the limited use and adoption by small businesses of digital technologies, and the traditional challenges facing cross-border trade. And these are mainly facing Africa, and this is reflected in the small and decreasing share of exports in GDP for Africa compared to Asia and in Asia, in the global South counterparts. Also, the high cost of trade due to the high tariff imposed on all products in sub-Saharan Africa. The high cost due to non-tariff measures imposed by middle and low-income countries, among which there are the African countries. Also, we have the poor logistics and the poor quality of trade and transport-related infrastructure. Also, Africa is facing the high cost due to red tape barriers, as shown here for the rest of Africa. Also, the low share of African economies that have legislation related to the e-commerce to protect consumers against the cyber crimes, for example. So the table shows that Africa has the lowest figure among the global southern economies. Finally, what are the opportunities that are raised by digitalization to promote trade integration in Africa? Intra-trade in Africa, its figures are very low compared to the figures in Europe and Asia, and we know that having a regional trade agreement doesn't generate gains automatically. So how digitalization could enhance the scope of intra-trade in Africa by lowering barriers to entry into export markets, by increasing connectivity among regional traders through online market platforms, by offering more solutions related to digital payments and logistics solution. And this would also have an important impact in expanding the formal sector by encouraging the financial inclusion. Promoting the automation of custom procedures to reduce trade cost and time to trade. Also, Africa could benefit from the high skill content in its intra-African trade by inserting itself in trade in digital services and creative industries. At the global perspective, Africa also can reduce its marginalization in global trade by enforcing the trade facilitation agreement, by tending to harmonize and coordinate all regimes related and border procedures. Also, digitalization would ensure digitalization will help Africa to integrate into global value chains, and it will facilitate also the implementation of trade facilitation agreement. In order to conclude, African countries can use digitalization of trade as a tool and objective, and to do this, they need to improve their digital infrastructure. They need to adopt some educational program for skills upgrading. They need to formulate a regional e-commerce strategy and to enforce laws to regulate digital trade. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, for this excellent presentation on trade integration and South-South cooperation and how digitalization matters in Africa. You investigate the importance of digitalization in fostering trade integration among Southern economies with an emphasis on intra-Africa trade. You present an important contribution to the literature around why digitalization matters for trade in Africa and for South-South cooperation. And you highlight the scope and the composition of trade is affected by digitalization. And thirdly, the paper presents the main challenges and opportunities that digitalization could possibly present for South-South integration with an emphasis on intra-Africa trade. Last but not least, I would like to welcome our final panelist, Professor Nir Shteri, Professor Shtiri is a professor at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, and a research fellow at the Kobe University in Japan. He's authored 10 books and about around 170 academic papers, very prolific. Professor Nir has been quoted and interviewed by hundreds of media outlets worldwide and has worked and consulted for the Asian Development Bank, various UN agencies. Professor Shtiri, over to you. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Hani. Thank you for the opportunity to do this presentation. This is actually the continuation of the previous presentation, because the previous presentation kind of talked about e-commerce and the payment systems and all that, and this specifically focuses on kind of the payment system, mainly the financial technologies. And so a lot of different types of technologies are facilitating the payment and access to finance in general, like the data getting from the satellite and drones and artificial intelligence, including machine learning and deep learning and big data and blockchain, and all of them are facilitating kind of the financial inclusion in the global south. And I'll be talking about that, but there are also kind of adverse social and economic impacts, because many of the big data companies are not using the right data, or they are abusing people's data. So I'll briefly talk about those things also in this presentation. First, talking about the general problem that the world is currently facing, the World Bank has the Global Index database. I think they do a pretty good job in updating data, but this has been one thing that the latest we can find is from 2017. At least I checked a few months ago. And so 1.7 billion adults do not have any access to financial services. And also the International Finance Corporation says that more than 200 million small and medium-sized enterprises do not have access to financial services. And most of them are from the global south, of course. And also fintech, and if you are new to this fintech thing, this is a definition of fintech, and any type of computer program or other technologies that might improve or support the delivery and use of banking and financial services. This is the definition of fintech. And so okay, this is a very vast area, but I'll be briefly giving some examples of big data, artificial intelligence, and blockchain in facilitating financial access. Some examples: big data, kind of used big data in the global south, and all these are companies based in the global south. Actually, AgriLife is from Kenya, and Kilimo Salama is also from there, and Quesky is from Mexico, and Alibaba is from China. So they are using big data, and the main problem in from economics to get access to finance is there are two things. One is information opacity. That means there are not really credit bureaus if you go to many developing or the global south, and they might have some, but they do not function properly. Example is the country of Sierra Leone. The Sierra Leone country has about 7 million people, and out of 7 million people, the country's credit bureau has only information about 2,000. Okay, 2,000 out of 7 million is 0.00, and this is a small proportion. So basically, the data from these different data, because pretty much everyone has a phone these days. The developing countries, the phone penetration is more than 100%. And if you look at the least developed countries, still they have about 75% penetration. So everyone has phone, and people use phone. How they use phone, and basically the usage pattern can tell a lot about the kind of credit worthiness. That is, information opacity is reduced. And transaction cost. The country of Tanzania, for example, one example is from there. If you apply for a loan, and if the bank people need to visit your home to kind of verify that you have kind of credit worthiness, and the cost is around $20. So $20 is a lot of money per visit cost, because average loan in Tanzania is about $63. So $20 is a lot of cost, but on the other hand, if you get data from these mobile usage pattern that many big data companies provide, and you can just get the data for $1.25 rather than $20. So that's how they reduce the transaction cost of doing business. And if you look at QSK, for example, this Mexican fintech company, many of them do not require a visit to the branch. They do not even have branch. Alibaba's My Bank is only internet-only bank. So no personal visit is needed. They will give you loan. And so Kilimo Salama is an insurance company. It was the biggest insurance company in Africa in a few years' time, providing micro insurance to the small farmers. And so they directly send payment on your cell phone, like M-Pesa system that they used in Kenya, and use directly. It is based on the index insurance. That means you don't have to file a claim. They don't have to come to visit your farms to estimate the damage. So index insurance means basically they just look at the weather pattern, too much rain, too little rain, too much kind of the heat, and all those things automatically lead to payment. So all of these are reducing transaction cost and information opacity in facilitating payment. So these are some of the examples that financial services that they provided using a lot of data from different sources. So this is one thing. And big data is already a little old thing. And they are moving to, and actually they say that if you just talk about big data, they don't even give you funding from Silicon Valley venture capitalists anymore. You have to talk that we are doing artificial intelligence. So that's what everyone is doing, artificial intelligence, which is just another way of saying big data, but kind of using artificial algorithm. So these are some examples that I basically took from that. Ant Group is again Alibaba's financial branch, and it has artificial intelligence based chatbot, and chatbot does all the things. It handles 2 to 3 million queries per day. Even the e-commerce, Alibaba's e-commerce vendors can use that, and maybe the people do not really have to talk with the people, and they reduce the cost by 83% by just doing that. And they are very accurate actually. The fraud rate is only 1 in a million. So there is a lot of fraud in financial industry. They can reduce the fraud because artificial intelligence works fast, better way, because persons do not. For example, I'm really lazy. I cannot work more than 1 or 2 hours per day. Artificial intelligence chatbot can work 24 hours a day. So that is good. And if I made some mistake in M-Pesa transaction, I send my payment to wrong people, then okay, I have to reverse the payment. I have to call the M-Pesa customer services department, and it takes a lot of time to connect to them because a lot of customers do that thing. And the routine things like reversing your payment, they can do immediately. You don't have to really wait for 1 hour to get your phone call, and by that time your payment already will go to the wrong person. So these types of things will be facilitated by artificial intelligence. They can process information really fast. I won't forget the things that I did this morning, but computers do not forget. They work 24 hours a day. And people are greedy, people are affected by emotion. All those things do not happen with artificial intelligence. So basically all these things. And one example is the South Africa's TAM Bank. And so basically this bank uses only 250 employees. Most of the things are done by artificial intelligence. On the other hand, if you look at the South African banks that have branches, they have average of 50,000 people. So 250 because pretty much everything is digitized. Artificial intelligence will help you. And also the if you have to do card replacement cost, like the bank is using artificial intelligence automatically charges only 40 rands compared to a lot of money that other things are. So artificial intelligence, including the United Bank of Africa and Nigeria, Safaricom's M-Pesa, Chinese and South Africa's this bank, and all of them are using that to do things faster in a better way than human being. So these are the things, and with fewer error. So I think I have blockchain, and so I'll just skip that because I think my time is already almost over. So blockchain is also doing a lot of good thing, and I have that, and maybe you'll read the paper later because it will be posted online. That's what so okay, blockchain has a lot of things, and one thing is ID. Many people do not have ID. Even if you want to get one, there are no people to give you. The ID things can be forged. So blockchain is solving a lot of that problem at a very low cost. So because in the first place, you need an ID if you want to have financial access. That is another advantage. So, but things are not really good. Not all these companies are utilizing technologies in a good way. So one example I have in China. China actually closed all the things, the P2P lending, people give different explanations. There are 6,000 P2P lending. They use big data to process the forms. And right now, November 2020, there are no more peer-to-peer forms in China. So
Sorry, Professor Neer, you have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, Annie. So basically, there is a lot of abuse and misuse of consumers' data. If I do not pay my loan, and apparently the Chinese companies, other parts of the world too, tell all my social network people that I'm a defaulter, I did not pay my loan. And actually in India, people even post that in kind of in social media, I'm a defaulter. Not only that, actually one example in China is that from the Jiangsu province, and a student wanted a loan of about $14,000 in 2016. And to get $14,000 loan, the student had to give her nude picture as a collateral. So that the thing is, if she doesn't pay the loan, then basically kind of they call the social shaming. That's what they are using to get loans and misusing. And in India, okay, so all these Chinese companies are going to other countries. Like these are the Chinese companies, P2P lender operating in India, Vietnam, and Indonesia. That I took the latest number in India, about 500 Chinese companies, 140 Chinese company in Indonesia, illegal P2P company, and Vietnam 10. So in Vietnam, the legal limit is you cannot charge interest of more than 1.67% every month. But Chinese companies are charging 150% the P2P lenders in Vietnam. And so also in India, 8 people committed suicide from kind of December and January because they were not able to pay the loan, and all these P2P lenders were harassing them and all those problems. And so these are some of the problems. And so that's what I described. And the governments have to take some measures to stop unethical and illegal practices. And if the government can do that, and this is a good idea. And so again, the global south based financial technology companies going to other global south, that's where the promising potential is, rather than American company, the US companies going to global south. I think that is my main thing in the paper. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Again, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Shteri, for a very rich and informative presentation around the topic of South-South cooperation in financial technology in a globally inclusive economic architecture. Your paper touches on how recent advances in computing and telecommunication technologies are promoting financial inclusion in the global south by dramatically transforming the way the financial industry operates. You evaluate to what extent the emergence of financial technology companies based in the global south are promoting financial inclusion in the respective regions. And you emphasize the internationalization of southern-based fintech companies and evolving South-South cooperation in the fintech arena. As moderator, I'd like to take this opportunity to ask 2 sets of pertinent questions to each presenter as a way to stimulate discussions and to interrogate further some of the arguments and issues raised in the presentations and in the papers. Ms. Polaki, my 2 questions for you. What should be the new characteristics of the South-South development finance landscape? And second, what role should be the role of the private sector, the local private sector in South-South development finance, and why? You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Hani. So since I have 5 minutes, I will try to be a bit brief. The paper enumerates some of the characteristics of what should be this new South-South development finance landscape, which I mentioned in my presentation. But it also makes 7 broad recommendations on what should be the objectives and modalities of South-South development finance as part of a renewed global South development finance architecture. So these recommendations, for instance, are to favor more and more untied grants over loans rather than loans with conditionalities in South-South development finance, to create mechanisms to strengthen development coordination, among South-South partners in a particular country and within the broader development finance community at country level, to better align South-South development cooperation finance with national and regional development priorities and explore new modalities, to leverage private sector development into South-South development finance through, for instance, the inclusion of local content requirements, exercise greater scrutiny over loan conditionalities, and encourage in South-South development cooperation finance the earmarking of specific programs to support the private sector. Also to identify innovative ways to mobilize local private sector finance and to increasingly use South-South development cooperation finance to strengthen development governance in recipient countries by supporting transparency and accountability mechanisms, and to form new types of public-private partnerships, relationships with the Global South to achieve the SDGs. Now, what are some of what form can these new types of public-private relationships take, for instance? For example, the paper argues that South-South cooperation development finance at country level should be better anchored within the integrated national financing framework and delivered within multi-stakeholder partnerships involving the public and private sectors. For instance, in Ghana has a national SDG delivery fund. In Mauritius, the government has a law that allows it to impose a 2% corporate social responsibility levy on the private sector in order to feed into its national CSR fund, corporate social responsibility fund. So perhaps, you know, more pool fund at a national level, more pool funds can be established to finance the achievement of the SDGs. And, you know, in the years ahead, as we recover from the pandemic and as countries put in place policies to strengthen the local private sector development, the Global South should consider the imposing, for instance, CSR levies or SDG levies on the profits of domestic and especially international private sector companies in order to replenish these pool funds. So I don't know whether this answers your question. But the point that I would like to make is that, you know, by strengthening the local private sector, the idea is to use South-South development finance to strengthen the domestic resource mobilization base of countries in the long run. And in order to put in place such a strategy, how can we promote local private sector engagement within South-South finance? For instance, countries could negotiate with their partners from the Global South when they receive grants or even loans from their southern development partners for conditionalities to be untied, because sometimes when a country gets a package of finance from its southern development partner, there are conditionalities involved. Like, for instance, inputs must be sourced from the origin countries. And we should increasingly go towards untying of conditionalities. Also, southern countries, you know, like African countries, when they receive South-South finance, they could include clauses in these contracts that stipulate the use of locally sourced inputs and and relationship building with local suppliers in delivery. More and more of these development cooperation finance programs should also integrate private sector and industrial capacity building components. There could also be the introduction of corporate social responsibility components in South-South development cooperation finance programs. So this is, I don't know whether my 5 minutes have been used up. I think it has. So I pass it over to you, Annie. And more, of course, for the paper. Thank you. In the paper.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Aruna. Thank you. Dr. Carrich, my two questions for you, the following. What are some of the constraints on trade for African countries? And can you give some examples of how South-South cooperation help remove those constraints? 5 minutes for you.
Yeah, so if you remember in my earlier remarks, some of the constraints include things like inadequate infrastructure, particularly in these discussions. Digital infrastructure requires also background infrastructure, including things like good roads to facilitate logistics. You can't do e-commerce without proper logistics. We need infrastructure, for example, to encourage the digital finance. Without that, you can't do much. And so infrastructure is one. We also talk a lot about regulatory frameworks to make sure that we cut on the red tape. The professor from Mariam from Cairo actually had a very beautiful graphic there to show you, for example, the red tape constraints as a reality in doing business in Africa. So there are those kind of things that need to be done. Now, I started off my comment by saying that the concept of capacity need to be at the core of the conversation. And I think that how will South-South cooperation help? The first one is actually to build capacity. Basically, you know, we can have a lot of knowledge exchanges, plus also training programs to beef up our skill capabilities across the continent. Some of this is already happening. I think that, for example, Brazil has been providing training for agricultural sector in places like Angola and Mozambique. And there's a lot more scope for that kind of thing to happen across. So in terms of knowledge exchange and training, there's a lot going on. And I think that one clear example where we can benefit. The other one where South-South cooperation can be important is on infrastructure upgrade. We know, for example, that there's a lot of involvement of China in particular in Africa these days, you know, infrastructure for resources. Maybe you guys have heard about that, but I think that we can reconfigure that so that whatever infrastructure is being developed actually is fit for purpose. So South-South cooperation can help the African continent to overcome the major infrastructure deficit that the continent faces. The other one is on you know, support to the private sector and strengthening private sector development. For example, we can borrow things that have worked in other countries and see how those lessons can be transferred, including business regimes, for example, regulatory frameworks, how that can be fostered. Business forums across the global south could be one mechanism, so that SMEs can learn from more established firms in other parts of the global south. The other area that I think the South-South cooperation could help is actually on issues around reducing capacity risk factors. Right now, we are talking about COVID. For many years, HIV/AIDS has been a major problem on the African continent. And working with countries in the global south on, for example, research and development in health systems and so on, that will go a long way in actually reducing some of these risk factors. But the risk factors are not just only in health. You also have climate change, you know, and African agriculture, for example, is dominantly dependent on weather. So we could invest in climate smart agriculture, and we can borrow, for example, from the Indians with their experience of the Green Revolution. And there, of course, I'm not saying that everything that happened in the Green Revolution in India and other places were all good. We can avoid that, right? We could have an agricultural revolution that is not polluting, so we can avoid those dangers that these other countries already experience. In other words, you can actually leapfrog some of these problems and take on the things that actually have worked well.
Great. Thank you.
So, and one last one, and then I can stop there. Okay. Is actually the role of multilateral banks. I think that we can pool finances. I think there are a few of these banks that have come around. You have the New Development Bank, for example, the Asian Investment Bank, and there are a number of those that have emerged, and those are very critical sources of resources. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Carrich. Professor Miriam, Professor Zaki, my two questions for you are the following. What is the role of digitalization in improving trade facilitation in Africa? And what are the main institutional reforms that are needed in order to promote intra-Africa trade in a digital era? You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Hani, and thank you, Dr. Miriam, for presenting our paper. I think on the first question, very quickly, the role of digitalization is fundamental because in order to improve trade facilitation, definitely we need to make the infrastructure of customs itself more automated, and this by introducing different softwares like the Asekuda, for instance, software that will clearly help African countries make their customs procedure more efficient and therefore reduce the time to export, whether it's time to trade or the number of days that we need in order to clear products. And this is definitely very important for the African Continental Free Trade Agreement in order to boost intra-African trade. On the main institutional changes that are needed, I think I will classify them into three main institutional requirements. The first one is related to the intellectual property right laws that needs to be updated in order to regulate the use of different digital products and services that are associated to digitalization. Second, also, as it was shown in our paper, and I do not go into details because of time constraint, we need more of consumer protection laws that have to be activated in order to increase the consumer trust in online products and to improve also the efficiency of these products delivery. And finally, to what extent it will be possible to have a legal liability of online intermediaries who serve the domestic markets, because this will help reduce all the unlawful contents that are associated to trade in digital products. So I think those are the main institutional reforms that are required in order to improve the digitalization and to make the trade facilitation agreement more tangible and more beneficial for African countries. And perhaps Dr. Miriam might want to add something to these elements. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shahir. One point only maybe to add is that regional trade agreements must contain some provisions related to the e-commerce, because when you compare the percentage of trade agreements that contain provisions related to e-commerce, for now North-South, it was like 70% of the trade agreements contain provisions, but the figure was very low for the South-South trade agreements, so maybe 33%. So we need to encourage South-South agreements to contain more provisions related to e-commerce.
Thank you very much, Professor Miriam and Professor Zaki. Professor Nir, my two questions for you. What changes are needed on the regulatory and policy fronts to utilize technologies such as artificial intelligence, big data, blockchain in order to enhance the welfare of low-income individuals in the Global South? And what is the most important critical component missing from the Global South economies in order to develop local capabilities to use fintech for promoting financial inclusion? You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Hani. So on the regulatory and policy fronts, maybe two things. First thing is there has been a lot of misuse and abuse of information. And I already gave example, like 8 people committed suicide in India because of the harassment and social shaming and all that thing. And one in Kenya actually just a few weeks ago. So also in Kenya, actually, there are hundreds of thousands of young people and they took loan. And in many cases, the loan was actually less than $2, but they have been blacklisted forever in their life that they cannot get any of those loans. So a couple of things on the policy front means, so the government has to make sure that these fintech companies do not give loan to people if the people do not demonstrate capability to utilize that properly. So maybe if they are getting business loan, do they really have capability to do business? And if they are taking that loan for consumption, do they have that capability? That may be one thing. And also kind of bigger penalty for abusing and misusing data in China, in India, all over the world. So on the data privacy front, this kind of many economies in the global south, they do not have, many of them do not have data privacy law in the first place. Second, even if they have, they do not enforce those laws. And so they have to fix that, having the data privacy law to make sure that they don't misuse and abuse. And so if they do, they face penalties. So those are some of the things. And so the data is, and they have to develop local capability, because if you want to solve the financial access problem in Malawi, maybe the Malawi companies in Malawi might do better job rather than Chinese company going to Malawi. So there is already a lot of data. Maybe people have already kind of using their phones, and they have phone usage related data, and they might be using social media. But the biggest challenge is there is a lot of data already existing everywhere in the world, and every day people create. Long ago, IBM was saying 3 quintillion bytes data. So local people giving training to people and developing local fintech firms. And so I think the biggest challenge is having people with capability to use artificial intelligence. India, which is a big country with 1.4 billion people, even India has no more than 75 good researchers in artificial intelligence. And China is good in global South economy. If you go outside China, no other global South economy really has any talent actually to do artificial. So basically, developing local talent to utilize big data, and maybe even creating some fintech and maybe collaboration with other global South companies, and also creating a better environment for other global South companies to enter. Those are some of the policy related changes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Nir. Well, it has appeared that we have come to the end of our time allocated for this stimulating seminar. I'm pleased to indicate that all the discussed papers are now available under the publications pages on both South-South Galaxy and South-South Global Thinkers. In closing, it gives me great pleasure to welcome the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation Deputy Director for Program and Operations, Dr. Grace Wang, who will be providing some closing remarks. Grace, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hani. First of all, let me extend thanks to all the distinguished speakers who have voluntarily contributed to the South-South Idea papers. This is a series of papers that aims to encourage such kind of candid, open sharing of ideas, of your research findings and policy recommendations on the issue of South-South cooperation and sustainable development goals. Although it doesn't represent any official position of UN or UNOSSC, it is rather a very rich reservoir of knowledge and ideas. The beauty of it is to bring diversity, to bring debate to the very important policy issue on South-South cooperation. And we do hope this kind of debate can continue and can inspire and inform policy-making process. As we know, the second UN high-level conference on South-South cooperation, the BAPA Plus 40, had highlighted trade and investment as a very important modality for South-South cooperation in order to support the implementation of sustainable development goals. And today, the event itself highlighted the subject of aid for trade, South-South cooperation, digital technology, financing, all are interlinked and key modes of implementation for sustainable development goals. As Dr. Bolaki said, let us keep the spotlight on Sustainable Development Goal 17, including the MOIs such as finance, technology, capacity, trade, as well as systematic issues, including policies, institutions, partnership, and data. And the discussion we just had is very hard to summarize, but these keywords are all repeated again and again. We talked about finance, and I heard a central message out of several speakers that international support to developing countries, including South-South financing, should be to improve domestic capacity of revenue generation and resource mobilization. This would require a focus on additionality principle, as well as SDG-aligned impact investing. And the partnership with local private commercial finance and local development banks, policy banks are exactly trying to do that. The creation of public goods becomes the core of South-South financing. Also, recommendations included on innovations of tools and modalities that may go beyond grants and loans to support countries by seeking out innovative instruments such as credit guarantees, issue of thematic funds. All this are putting the sustainable development aligned investment and financing at the center. Now, technology, we talked a lot about the information and communication technology, the digital transformation, what kind of opportunity through trade, through impacting on trade composition and types of product is fostering new opportunities and areas of cooperation among developing countries. This is not just about reaching trade agreements, but also technologically and financingly how to support each other on policy issues, on enabling environment, and on capacity development. This pandemic has shown us the great potential and power of digital transformation, but it also revealed to us the reality, the huge digital divide and some systematic issues that cannot be addressed by digitalization process itself. So we talked about capacity development, and it's very heartening to hear from you as researchers and policymakers to say that knowledge training are still needed and is very important as a core value of South-South cooperation. We talked about how to make sure that infrastructure itself is not the end. It needs to fit for purpose and further promote capacity to manage and utilize them for development outcomes. Now comes to the systematic issues. We talked about policy and institutional coherence. There, I heard from Dr. Nier about the global South economies should create even more favorable environment with examples in the fintech area, credit system, data privacy, and that is also echoed by Professor Zazi at the end, highlighted the IPR issues and local regulatory framework strengthening. Only by having that, we can address the challenge of operating legally. And in this regard, indeed, global South economies can really work together in harmonizing, but also in innovating on those regulatory frameworks to reach the standardization. I heard also in the policy and the institutions area, the regional public good is so important. There's an encouragement of South-South cooperation support to focus more on regional-based projects, programs that can generate regional public goods and benefits the entire region or sub-region rather than just the individual countries. We heard from Dr. George about the regional institutions are very well positioned to support cross-border initiative, to create transnational resilience to crisis. In terms of the systematic issue, we also talked a lot about multi-stakeholder partnership, the cooperation, the partnership with the local private sector, not only with large enterprises, but very importantly, small and medium-sized ones, with job creation potential, and have South-South cooperation support to be a catalyst for local private sector development to unleash that potential. Lastly, data, monitoring, reporting. Recently, just a few days ago, WTO launched, I think it's yesterday maybe, launched this report strengthening Africa's capacity to trade, and it highlighted the reporting of data cannot clearly show how much of the nearly 10 billion financing from Southern partners to the continent is spent directly on trade-related activities. And that is something that we need to get to be able to better inform policymaking. So because all these subjects are too important and too urgent to address, and because your knowledge is so rich on this, I hope we don't stop here at this event to share knowledge and recommendations, to debate and inspire better policymaking. That's why following this event, we will also do a soft launch of other publications of the South-South Idea Paper series on relevant subjects, such as a scoping paper, look at the Arab states region and Africa of what the implication of a better policy and legal environment can do, and what the implications for free trade area in the continent. In the WTO report recently, it also showed a survey of 33 African partner countries. 29 identified China as the South-South partner that provides most financing for economic diversification, closely followed by India as identified by 18 Africa partner countries. So very soon, we're going to soft launch through interview on 2 papers, one focused on the India example, a case study of trade and investment capacity building. Another one is creating synergies among the Chinese labor-intensive manufacturing, global buyers, and low-wage southern countries. In addition, another paper will be launched very soon. I hope you will, I'll be interested. Is the link between trade and inequality, a review of literature and emerging research agenda from the perspective of South-South cooperation. So all these efforts we are doing is to provide a platform for all brilliant minds of the global South and the North from all partners to share knowledge and to inform the policy thinking process. At the end, let me thank China Association for Trade in Service for their live broadcasting support that has already brought to, I think, about 1,500 viewers in the last hour or so, in addition to the participants of this event, and more will view the recording at a more convenient time online. All materials and the recording of this this event will be available at the South-South Global Thinkers platform and the South-South Galaxy platform. And from UN Office for South-South Cooperation, we thank you again for your participation and for the wonderful discussion. Thank you.